In the restless tides of Hollywood history, some works are born at the summit of glory, while others must traverse the valley of the shadow of death to achieve immortality. It's a Wonderful Life, 1946, directed by the legendary Frank Capra, is such a case. Today, it stands atop the American Film Institute's AFI list of the 100 most inspiring films of all time. Yet, few know that behind its radiant aura lies a journey of blood, tears, and bankruptcy. The birth of an independent dream. The year was 1945. The world was just emerging from the long darkness of World War II. Frank Capra, the celebrated director who had once captured the American heart with Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, returned from the front lines with a transformed spirit. No longer willing to be tethered by the Big Five Hollywood studios, Capra co-founded Liberty Films. It was an independent studio built on a singular creed: total creative freedom without interference. Their first and most ambitious project was an adaptation of the short story The Greatest Gift by Philip Van Doren Stern. Capra invested $10,000, a significant sum at the time, simply to acquire the rights to a story that many major studios had previously ignored. After several prominent screenwriters took their turn, Capra himself reshaped the script, infusing it with the profound humanism that defined his legacy. The Bedford Falls set, a technical marvel. To create a masterpiece that would transcend time, Capra spared no expense. Eschewing existing towns, he decided to construct the fictional town of Bedford Falls from the ground up at the RKO Ranch in Encino, California. It was one of the largest sets in American cinematic history. Spanning 4 acres, the equivalent of 4 standard football fields, the set featured 75 shops, a bank, and fully realized residential neighborhoods. Capra's perfectionism even extended to the flora. He had 20 real oak trees planted to ensure the environment felt authentic to the touch. Before 1946, Hollywood typically used painted cornflakes to simulate snow. However, the crunching sound produced when actors walked over it forced films to re-record all dialogue in post-production. Refusing such artifice, Capra's technical team invented a new chemical formula, a mixture of fire extinguisher foam, sugar, water, and soap. This mixture was pumped through high-pressure wind machines, creating light, silent flakes that drifted and clung to trees and streets just like the real thing. It took 6,000 gallons of this solution to blanket Bedford Falls, delivering a winter so visceral it stunned audiences. George Bailey, the hero without superpowers. The narrative centers on George Bailey, played by James Stewart, a man who spent his youth dreaming of grand voyages but found himself imprisoned by duty in his small hometown. George consistently chose others over himself. He gave up his college education for his brother. He used his honeymoon savings to save his father's building and loan association from collapse. He stood against the predatory Mr. Potter to protect the poor. Yet, his kindness seemed unrewarded when a financial error threatened him with prison. On that holy night, the kindest man in Bedford Falls stood on a bridge, contemplating a plunge into the icy river. He believed his only remaining value was the life insurance policy he would leave for his family. It was here that Clarence, a second-class angel, appeared to perform a profound psychological experiment. He showed George what the world would look like if he had never been born. The beautiful Bedford Falls became Pottersville, a place of vice, hatred, and coldness. His loved ones suffered tragic fates. George realized the weight of a single life. Every life touches so many others, and when one person is missing, they leave a hole that can never be filled. The bitter failure and the collapse of an empire. In the annals of cinema, few works carried the sheer weight of confidence and pride as It's a Wonderful Life. For Frank Capra, this was not merely a film project, it was a high-stakes gamble on his honor, his career, and his very soul. Having severed ties with the stifling Iron Curtain of major studios to found Liberty Films, Capra sought to prove a radical point, that an artist could stand on his own 2 feet, free from the patronage of corporate moguls. But reality dealt a lethal blow to the dream named Liberty. When the film premiered in December 1946, the atmosphere in the theaters was not the explosion of acclaim Capra had envisioned. Instead, the hollow silence of empty seats and a trickling box office created a haunting stillness within the offices of Liberty Films. Why did a story celebrating life and kindness fail so spectacularly? The answer lies in the psyche of the 1946 American audience. This was the first full Christmas after the end of World War II. The nation had emerged from the darkness of gunfire, but the psychological scars were still raw and bleeding. Audiences at the time were fractured. One side craved pure escapism, vibrant musicals and technicolor fantasies to drown out the echoes of loss. To them, the first half of It's a Wonderful Life was an unbearable weight. Watching an honest man driven to the brink of suicide was too dark, too soon. They did not want to pay to revisit the pain they were desperately trying to leave behind in the trenches. The other side sought a different kind of truth, a gritty, unvarnished realism. They Flocked to the Best Years of Our Lives, released that same year, which depicted the alienation and physical toll on returning veterans. Compared to the sharp edge of its competitors, Capra's Tale of Angels and Miracles was dismissed by contemporary critics as Capricorn, too sentimental, too preachy, and out of touch with the stark reality of the post-war world. To understand the magnitude of the disaster, one must look at the cold, hard numbers. The total cost of production and promotion skyrocketed to $3.18 million, an astronomical figure in the 1940s for a family drama. Capra had borrowed $1.54 million from banks, banking everything on a massive payout. However, the film only grossed approximately $3.3 million globally. Under the complex accounting rules of Hollywood at the time, after the theaters took their cut and distribution fees were paid, the film officially recorded a net loss of $525,000, equivalent to over $8 million today. This loss was more than just red ink on a ledger, it was a jagged blade that severed the jugular of Liberty Films. A young, independent studio simply did not have the internal fortitude to survive a failure of this magnitude on its maiden voyage. Creditors closed in. Frank Capra, once the uncrowned king of Hollywood, suddenly found himself standing on the same precipice of bankruptcy as his character, George Bailey. The collapse was swift and agonizing. To settle debts and maintain personal commitments, Capra and his partners were forced into the most heartbreaking decision of their lives, the dissolution of Liberty Films. All assets, machinery, and, most crucially, the directing contracts and ownership rights of their films were sold to Paramount Pictures for a pittance. This event marked the end of Capra's brief but proud era of independence. He would never again regain total control over his work. His subsequent films were produced under the watchful, skeptical eyes of major studios, and it was said that the creative fire within Capra grew noticeably dimmer after the scar of Bedford Falls. The bitterest pill was not the lost fortune, but the sting of rejection. Frank Capra had bet everything on the belief that humanity would always cherish goodness. When the audience turned away, he fell into a profound crisis of faith. For nearly 30 years, It's a Wonderful Life was regarded as a failed relic of cinematic history. It was shelved, covered in dust, and virtually erased from the public consciousness. People spoke of Capra as a director who had passed his prime, a man who tried to sell a dream too sweet for a world too bitter. No one could have predicted that this very bankruptcy, and this very rejected film, was silently accumulating the internal power for the greatest resurrection in the history of art. The bankruptcy of Liberty Films in 1947 was, in hindsight, a necessary sacrifice to birth an immortal legend. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes, one must lose everything to truly find the worth of oneself. In the end, George Bailey found his wings, but Frank Capra lost his studio. It is the ultimate irony of Hollywood, that the film which teaches us that no man is a failure, began its life as the industry's most famous casualty. The miraculous resurrection via copyright loophole. If not for a providential error, the film might have remained in the archives forever. In 1974, the film's copyright expired, and the studio failed to renew it. Consequently, the work fell into the public domain. American television stations, seeking free content for the holidays, began broadcasting It's a Wonderful Life repeatedly throughout the 70s and 80s. A miracle occurred. Through these free airings, the film seeped into every home, becoming an essential holiday tradition. Audiences finally recognized the eternal value of Capra's message. The film reclaimed the glory it had been denied 30 years prior. Contemporary meaning, from World War to pandemic. Why, after nearly 80 years, does It's a Wonderful Life still move us to tears? George Bailey never left his small town despite his wanderlust. This mirrors the sense of confinement many felt during the global pandemic. We felt stuck. But George taught us that happiness is not found in a distant destination, but in the seeds of kindness we plant where we stand. In the film, George's kindness is contagious. When he falls into ruin, the entire town rallies to save him. It wasn't just about the money, it was the accumulation of years of love. In an age where direct connection is often replaced by social media, the final image of George Bailey surrounded by family and friends is a priceless symbol of human bond. The legacy of Frank Capra, When Wings Become Immortal. If the collapse of Liberty Films was a painful scar on his career, the resurrection of It's a Wonderful Life in his final decades was the wings that destiny finally bestowed upon Frank Capra. His legacy cannot be measured by belated box office receipts alone. Instead, it has woven itself into the very cultural DNA of modern society. Frank Capra gave birth to a specific cinematic vernacular, Capraesque, a style that celebrates the inherent goodness of humanity, a fierce belief in the individual, and the transformative power of community solidarity. Through his legacy, he proved a profound point. A film may be dismissed as sentimental in one era, only to be embraced as healing in another. As the world grows more cynical and cold, the longing for the warmth of Bedford Falls only intensifies. Capra didn't just make movies, he constructed a value system where human beings were permitted to hope. It is impossible to discuss Capra's legacy without James Stewart. The greatest heritage they left behind was the character of George Bailey, a new archetype of the American hero. Requiring no brawn and wielding no worldly power, George Bailey represents the millions of ordinary people out there, those who sacrifice their private dreams every single day to shoulder the weight of family and responsibility. Stewart's hauntingly authentic performance, delivered by a man who had just returned from the horrors of war with real psychological trauma, added a layer of profound depth to the character, turning George Bailey into a friend to every generation of viewers. Capra's legacy serves as a perennial reminder of the value of existence. In a digital age where it is easy to feel small, anonymous, and insignificant, the film resonates like a cathedral hymn, affirming that every small act you perform, and every person you help, creates a ripple effect that alters the course of the world. Until his final days, Capra continued to receive thousands of letters from viewers claiming the film had prevented them from giving up on life. This is the ultimate peak of art, when a work is not merely watched, but lived. Frank Capra may have lost his studio in 1947, but through It's a Wonderful Life, he purchased a ticket to immortality in the hearts of millions, renewed every time a church bell tolls on Christmas Eve. Frank Capra once said that he wanted his films to say to the lonely, "You are not alone." Decades later, as the lights dim in living rooms across the globe every December, that promise remains unbroken. The empire fell, but the message flew. It's a Wonderful Life is the ultimate testament to the power of true art. A film can fail at the box office, it can bring down a company, but if it carries the core values of humanity, it will always find its way back to the heart. This Christmas, when you see the snowflakes fall or hear the church bells toll, remember the words of Clarence: every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings. And every time we choose kindness, this life becomes a little more wonderful.